If you've been following the news in the last 3 months, I can guarantee you've seen Elon Musk grandstanding like he just can't lose. You wouldn't know by looking, but the world's richest man is currently staring down one of the longest labor strikes in history. Since October 2023, Swedish mechanics at Tesla have been on strike, creating what's now become the longest labor dispute in Sweden in a century. In a country where nearly 90% of workers are covered by collective bargaining agreements, and where companies of Tesla's size almost universally participate in these agreements, Tesla stands as a remarkable outlier. What began as a local dispute has sparked growing solidarity. 12 Swedish unions and 3 Northern European ones have joined the fight. Dock workers won't unload Tesla vehicles. Postal workers won't deliver Tesla mail. Even the powerful Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, a major Tesla shareholder, has pressured Musk to negotiate. This confrontation represents more than a labor dispute. It's a clash between two visions of the future. Musk's model of unfettered corporate power versus the Nordic tradition of collective bargaining and workers' rights. Today on Pushback Talks, Fredrik and Leilani sit down with German Bender, chief analyst at the progressive Swedish think tank Arena and senior research associate at Harvard Law School's Center for Labor and a Just Economy. As the author of an upcoming book on the Tesla strike, Bender brings us inside this historic labor battle and reveals why its outcome could shape worker-employee relations far beyond Northern Europe. Listen in as they discuss what happens when the world's wealthiest man collides with one of the world's strongest labor movements, and whether this could be the beginning of an international resistance coalition.
I'm Fredrik Curtin, and I'm the filmmaker.
And I'm Leilani Farha, and I'm the advocate.
And this is again Pushback Talks. And we are living in strange times, Leilani.
Very strange. I had 40 centimeters of snow last night, but that's not what you mean.
That's kind of, it's beautiful, of course, with a lot of snow.
40 centimeters. It's a lot.
It's a lot, yeah. But could you build a snow wall to the U.S. then?
Oh. Maybe that's the answer. 6 months of the year, a snow wall between us and the U.S. of A.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked last episode about Canada under threat. And it's... I think it's interesting with so many peoples around the world have found out that they can't trust the US of A anymore.
Yeah.
And what happens when Trump and Musk is having, they have enemies in Denmark, in Saudi Arabia, in Turkey, in Mexico, Canada, everywhere, South Africa. They stir up a lot of shit. And at some point, people will fight back. And I think the resistance is coming together in some way. That's what I hope and I assume. But today we're going to talk about resistance against Elon Musk and big corporations who don't like unions. And here, in my country, we've had the longest strike in labor history. It's been the Metal Workers Union against Tesla. So we invited a man who knows a lot about this, German Bender, who is a chief analyst at a think tank called Arena, but he's also affiliated to the Harvard University and the Stockholm School of Economics. And Herman, you know a lot about. Can you just tell us, welcome first to Pushback Talks.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
But tell us, what's cooking? It's been on for a year, this strike. What is it all about?
Well, it's, actually it's been going on for a little more than a year. It started in October 27th of 2023, so it's close to a year and a half pretty soon. And it's the first and only strike against... there are many reasons why this strike is historic. As you mentioned, it's one of the longest strikes ever in Swedish history. It's also the first and so far the only strike against Tesla anywhere in the world, despite Tesla's, numerous and documented attempts to counteract and crush attempts of organizing among their employees. There has never been a formal strike anywhere.
It seems like Tesla is kind of unique in the world of automobiles because most of the US big automakers have unions. So Tesla is unique.
Yeah, I don't think we have time to go into in detail here, but there are important differences between the industrial relations systems, so the labor market models in Europe and especially in the Nordics and the United States. So you can organize in a union here in Sweden despite not being acknowledged by the employer. In the United States, you're either unionized or you're not. Here you can be without having a collective bargaining agreement, which is the reason why they're striking here. But as you say, in the United States, the big automakers, the big three, they're usually called, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, which used to be Chrysler, they have collective bargaining agreements, contracts with their employees. But Tesla doesn't. And because they don't have such an agreement, workers don't have the right to strike. In the US, you only have the right to strike if you have a collective bargaining agreement. Of course, you can go on unlawful strike, but if you want to have a formal right to strike, you have to have a collective bargaining agreement. But in Sweden, you have the right to strike always as an employee. If you, of course, I mean, there are rules you have to comply with, but you don't have to have a collective bargaining agreement. In fact, you can strike in order to get a collective bargaining agreement. So you can submit an employer to various types of conflict measures. Strikes is one of those, but you can use others, like blockades, for instance, which are very common in the ongoing strike against Tesla, to force an employer to sign a collective bargaining agreement. And that's what's happening in this case. So Tesla doesn't have a collective bargaining agreement anywhere in the world. And in Sweden, what happened in October 2023 is that the workers in Tesla repair shops got fed up finally and demanded that their union, which is called IF Metall, it's an industrial union, demanded that their union call a strike against Tesla in order to force Tesla to sign a collective bargaining agreement. So they did. And since then, I think 13 or 14 other unions in Sweden and in Norway, Denmark, and Finland have joined the strike through so-called solidarity action or sympathy action, it's sometimes it's called. So they are using other mostly blockades, which aren't really strikes, but they are ways of targeting services and products that a company needs. So, for instance, the cleaners union have stopped cleaning in Tesla repair shops. The transportation workers have stopped unloading Tesla from Swedish ports, and also in Norway, Denmark, and Finland. So Tesla has to bring in their cars through trucks from Germany. The electricians' unions have stopped maintenance and installation of Tesla superchargers and so forth. So there are many types of solidarity action which are used in this case, and that's also illegal in the United States. So these are power resources that unions have in Sweden that unions in some other countries don't.
Leilani, this is kind of cool, and I know your first job as a lawyer was to work for a labor union. So how do you see, I can see a little smile coming up when German tells you about all these different solidarity actions happening.
I worked for a union-side labor law firm. So the law firm was representing unions in disputes mostly, not exclusively, but mostly car industry. So I've been to, the Ford motor plant and sat in on arbitrations, and very interesting. I have to say the strike is amazing, and the unique situation they're in where the strikers are actually backed by a union. It's not that they're trying to unionize.
Right.
So they have a certain strength there because they have the unions. They have their back is supported by the union. But where I get tingly is when I hear about supportive strikes, like that solidarity, understanding that we're all in this together. I love that. And we're starting to see movements like this in many conflict situations around the world where it's the solidarity that's so important and people starting to realize, actually, we are all connected. Right. We are connected. I mean, in that case, it's a very close connection, but still, it's pretty amazing. I think I heard that the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund has gotten involved. Is that right, Herman?
Yeah. I mean, there have been, since the strike started, there have been a number of developments and other stakeholders that have tried to push Tesla in other ways than dispute mechanisms like strikes. And the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is, I think, the world's largest, which owns a substantial part of actually the world's stock value. And I think it's like 1% of the value of the world's entire stock markets.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah, they have a lot of oil money. And they also own quite a substantial part of Tesla. And the CEO of the Norwegian Wealth Fund, I don't remember his name, but he's pretty close to Elon Musk. He did an interview, I think it was on X, but you can find it on YouTube, with Elon Musk, where he asked Elon about the strike. And Elon said, this was around April 2024. And Elon Musk said, no, things are going well in Sweden. I think the storm has blown over, something like that, he said, which was not true. I mean, this was like 6 months into the strike, and the strike is still going on. But the Wealth Fund and other institutional investors, like pension funds, have made formal demands at Tesla stock owners' meetings to include some type of clause in Tesla's, global policies to make it more difficult for Tesla to do business in company, or let's say to persecute union organizing. And to combat it. Tesla already has some kind of clause stipulating that in their global policies. They have something saying that they have to comply with local regulations or something like that. But the way Tesla interprets that so far is that as long as they don't break any laws, and, that's also debatable whether they do or not in some countries, but as long as they don't break any laws, they can operate in the way they see fit. But the thing in Sweden and in the Nordic countries in general, I would say, is that there are very strong social norms that are really important for the labor market model to work. For instance, it's not illegal here to bring in strike breakers when a strike occurs. So if a union calls a strike and workers don't go to their job anymore, then in order to keep operations going, an employer can bring in other people who do the job that the striking workers no longer do, right? That's not illegal for an employer to do, but it's strongly against old norms. In most countries.
Yeah, that's the worst people on the planet, the scumbags.
Yeah, we call them scabs.
Scabs. Yeah, they're called scabs sometimes.
So where do they bring them in from?
Well, from different repair shops in Sweden, but also from, I think, 14 or so European countries. There was a report in a Swedish union magazine about this a couple of months ago, and they found that a bit more than 40 workers from 14 different European countries have been brought in. And, back in the day, that used to be, like 70 or 100 years ago, when companies did that usually caused a lot of violence. So people fought and beat up scabs or strikebreakers. Sometimes they were killed.
We have a story here of the harbor of Malmö, 1908. There was a ship of British scabs, and
it was set on fire.
They planted a bomb, yeah, and there were some people dying, and the people who did it went to prison. But there was such a big solidarity movement around all over Europe for these workers to be free. So in the end, they got liberated, and the guy who did it, he became really old. So I met him several times. Anton Nilsson was his name. So it was for a long time a very strong memory in Swedish history of don't come here and destroy our solidarity.
Yeah.
So it's deep. And of course, the collective bargaining treaty is nothing radical. It's like, all the big Swedish export companies had it forever. And they also find it practical when they go to open a factory in Mexico or wherever. It's good to talk to the counterpart.
Yeah. That's a very strong norm around that in Sweden. As you say, most companies have it. I think around 9 out of 10 workers in Sweden have collective bargaining agreements. So around 90% of the workforce are covered by collective bargaining agreements. And if you look at companies the size of Tesla in Sweden, and it should be said that Tesla isn't a big company in Sweden. It has around 300 employees because we don't have any factories here. We only have repair shops. The only car manufacturing in Europe that Tesla has is a factory outside Berlin, which is really large. But otherwise they have, sales, repairs, and charging infrastructure. But companies of that size are almost 100%, you would say, unionized in the US. But here it means that they have collective bargaining agreements. So Tesla is a really exceptional case here, that they are, refusing to abide by any norms as long as they, from their point of view, don't break any laws. So what they're doing is trying to sort of go against all norms and all unwritten rules that make the Swedish model work.
Yeah, So I heard Elon Musk say that part of why he doesn't like unions and presumably collective bargaining agreements is because he doesn't want to create a lord versus peasant atmosphere or environment. But as someone who's done a little bit of work with unions, it's the opposite. In fact, collective bargaining is what eliminates or helps to reduce the lord versus peasant environment. And it's so typical of, I mean, he's a libertarian, I suppose, but it's so typical of a libertarian to switch the narrative that way, right? Like, what is it that the workers are wanting through a collective bargaining agreement that they don't feel they get without it at Tesla?
Well, I mean, I completely agree. If you want to reduce the lords and peasant dimension, you could start by reducing income inequality writ large, but specifically in that company. Like, you know, his workers aren't the ones having like $400 billion fortune. That creates a lords and peasant situation.
Yeah. Well, then, I mean, it's Sweden. I mean, I don't think Sweden is a country that you just said 90% of employees have a collective bargaining agreement. Yeah. I think Sweden isn't known as a place of gross inequality.
No.
So what is he talking about, lord and peasant, in the Swedish context?
I mean, I think what they're asking for is guarantees of wage increases, which they don't have if they don't have collective bargaining agreement. If they don't have an agreement, then it's completely at the discretion of managers to decide who gets a pay raise and who doesn't. They want better insurances, so insurance policies that are, it's sort of a package that the collective bargaining agreement grants all employees, and that they now have, but they're not as good, they're not as generous as the collective bargain ones are. For instance, pensions schemes or sick leave and stuff like that. And they also want a say in how the companies run, and they can, to some extent, influence that through Swedish labor law, but they have more recourses to bargain with their employer if they have a collective bargaining agreement on issues. And that, I think, is the thing that Elon Musk is most opposed to. So the cost for a collective bargaining agreement, at least in Sweden, would be, almost insignificant because Tesla only has like 300 employees here. They might be afraid of some type of contagion effect, so that if they would sign an agreement here, other countries where they have more employees would demand it, for instance, Germany or the United States, and that would be more costly. And that's not an insignificant reason, but I think this influence reason is much more important. He doesn't want to let anyone else decide or at least even influence how the companies run. He may be a libertarian in some sense, but I would say that he's more an authoritarian. So he wants to have unchecked power on everything he owns. And I mean, what we're seeing now in the US is on other things as well.
And he believes, I think that's a part of the tech billionaires, that they've been pumping themselves all the time of being these great individuals who are saving the world, who are changing the world. And that's been a part of their success, is selling themselves as these amazing figures. And for a long time, people saw them as saviors. I mean, Elon Musk was, of many progressive people, loved because he confronted the fossil industry and he was bringing something new in. So his issue is that he also believes that he knows best all the time. He is smarter, and the smartest guy in the room should decide. That's his issue. And then he works with Trump, who also probably think that he is smart.
And who is not the smartest guy in the room.
No, and that's that's what we're all are up against right now. Very, very evil people who are shaking the world, and especially the poor people of the US are now really, they can see their government being destroyed, which is like, it's not a small thing.
No.
So, Herman, just to wrap up the Swedish strike, it's been on since October 23. Mm-hmm. When will this end?
Nobody knows. I mean, Elon Musk hasn't shown any sign or interest in compromising. And the unions have invested so much prestige and they have so much public support that it's hard to see that any of the sides would back down. so far, it's kind of a stalemate. Nothing really happens.
And the Swedish unions have money to keep this going. So it's not, I mean...
Yeah, in terms of money, it's not an issue. I think the principal union here, IF Metall, they have a conflict fund of like around $1 billion, so they can go on...
Okay.
If they have to pay...
So the strikers are paid.
Yes. Yeah, they're paid. Yeah. They're paid more than their wage. They're paid 130% of their wage to compensate for pensions and vacation pay.
Wow.
But I mean, it's a very small cost for the union. So it's not an economic issue at all. It's more of a public relations issue. If the public support would wane, or if other unions would start, backing down their support, that would maybe have an effect.
There was a story recently of a lot of people from Stockholm in Tesla who went to the mountains to go to ski with their kids. And then there were like 200 Teslas stuck at one of these superchargers that didn't work because of the blockade. So they were standing there in the snow.
I heard that, and there was a Tesla manager who went out on X and said this is the fault of the strike. We would have installed 100 more superchargers around Sweden but on the other hand, Tesla has repeatedly said during the strike that they haven't been affected at all. That everything is business as usual. They're going on as if nothing happened. So they can't have both stories at the same time. So I would say that there's been some disruption, but not so far enough to shake Tesla.
No. And we can see that the sales are going down all over Europe. I mean, in Sweden, the sales at least went down 50% in January this year.
Canada is suggesting huge tax on Tesla because of the tariff threat against our country. That'll have a huge impact.
Yeah, I would hope the European Union does the same. But I think that has more to do with, Fredrik, what you were saying about Elon Musk's role in the United States current administration than with the strike, unfortunately, because during the first 2 years of the strike, 23 and 24, Tesla was the Model Y, which is one of their cars, was the most sold car in Sweden. So the strike didn't really affect their sales. But now, in the past, I think, maybe 2 months, Tesla's car sales have taken a big hit across the world. And I think that has more to do with his, very weird sort of strong right turn that he's taken recently. So hopefully that will affect them more and maybe could lead to, questions being asked within Tesla about whether Elon Musk should be the CEO going forward.
Yeah, because he's in one way also destroying his own company.
Yeah.
For sure destroying the brand of his company because, we can see here in Sweden now Tesla owners will have a sticker on. I bought this car before Elon went crazy. Right. So it's because, and I just before this show started, I saw a Finnish newspaper writing that Tesla owners are afraid to get their cars sabotaged by activists, So it's no fun to drive a Tesla suddenly.
Yeah.
For sure. I'm looking at them very differently even here now in my neighborhood. There's so many Teslas and I'm looking at them now like, man, even when I'm on X, I'm still on X and I don't tweet I don't tweet very often or post very often anymore, but I'm still on it and I feel nauseous every time I go on. I'm wondering, Herman, if you think that there could be a new kind of solidarity for the strikers in Sweden, because I think what we're seeing Elon do in the United States with the government workers, USAID workers, is an indication of how he views everyday working people, which is with complete disregard for the disruption that he's causing to their lives and livelihoods. So I just wonder, is it a moment maybe where there could be some kind of global support?
Yeah, it's so difficult not to be disheartened by everything that's going on, because I've written a lot about this strike since it started, and I wrote an article in The Guardian about a little more than a year ago, where I tried to argue sort of, I thought, maybe this could reach Musk. Somebody he knows might read The Guardian. It's not unlikely. And I try to argue in terms of, saying that he shouldn't view Swedish unions as the enemy. They are very, very cooperative and constructive. They're not combative as other unions in some other countries. They really try to work with companies and so forth, and operating his company in Sweden would be much easier if we would sign a collective bargaining agreement. And that he's breaking all norms, and, that's really frowned upon by almost everyone in Sweden. But I wouldn't write that article today because, in fact, I think that breaking norms, getting people upset, going against the rules, that's part of the thing for Musk. I mean, he sees that as a compliment if you say something like that to him. If you say you're doing the opposite of what everybody would expect you to, you're breaking all norms, you're going against the grain here, he would say, yeah, that's disruption. That's what I do. So, it's hard to be hopeful.
Disruption. I call it imperialism, but yeah. He calls it disruption.
Yeah, authoritarianism. Yeah. I mean, and solidarity. Yeah, of course. I mean, I think when I've spoken about the strike outside of Sweden, I've almost always been met with enthusiasm and, hope that people say, oh, wow, you have these regulations that allow unions to issue solidarity strikes, and you have such a high collective bargaining coverage, and companies abide by the labor market rules and so forth. People generally view this as a good thing, and there have been shows of support from the UAW, the United Auto Workers in the United States, and IG Metall in Germany, which is the Swedish union's sister union. And other international union organizations have, rhetorically or vocally expressed support with the strike. But, I mean, does that affect Elon Musk? I doubt it, and I would even go so far as to say that he's sort of maybe even amused by it or, triggered.
I don't know if he's ready to lose Tesla. It's hard to know, because at some point he's destroying, his own. Of course, he's the hero of somebody, but if you ask around the European governments now, how many do you think, conservative, social democrats, whoever, who will say, oh, Elon Musk is a great guy? Most people now will say, oh my God, he turned out to be a fascist. And you can see the apartheid roots in whatever he's doing.
That's true.
Because he's South African. So I think there is a lot of, I guess you also saw it, Herman, that the former Swedish Prime Minister, the conservative Carl Bildt, has been extremely outspoken on both Trump and Elon Musk. So in some way, there is a new coalition of voices coming out against the weirdness and the craziness of Trump and Musk. So somewhere there must be, it's the possibility of forming some kind of resistance to the craziness. Of course, they are pushing everybody. So I know you wrote something about that. You think that maybe Trump will push the Swedish government to help his friend Elon Musk. I don't know if that's possible. But so of course they are trying to threaten people. We saw the face of the king of Jordania the other day when he's been there. He's obviously good. They are good at insulting people or scaring the shit out of people. But how far can that go till people say, okay, I'm not taking this, we are many not taking this. And how will that resistance look like? I'm really curious. I think it's interesting in some way.
Yeah, I do too. And I think from our perspective, I'm saying you and I in Europe, because we don't really know yet what the European response will be. I'm saying to what's going on in the United States right now. And I think that it's important to have as unified response as possible, because the risk is that countries will go on their own and try to get as good a deal with the United States as they can manage. And I think that's a strategy that benefits Trump. And he would he would probably do the same. Maybe he will do broad tariffs against the United European Union, but he will also target individual countries to try to, cause fissures and try to force countries to bargain with him individually. And I think that a unified European response would be much, much more effective in terms of a resistance, right? Because, what can Sweden do on our own against the United States? Not much.
Well,
I actually think there should be a global response to him.
Yeah.
I think all the countries have to come together. You look at the position South Africa's in, taking such a principled response, right? They said they don't care. They basically told Trump to F himself and he can do whatever he wants to South Africa, but they're not going to play ball. But they shouldn't be left on their own in that position, right? I mean, they're taking a big hit. It's already a country that's struggling, especially, well, Fredrik knows much more about that than I do. He's been there, spent much time there. I think apartheid is still strong there economically. Yeah, global alliance against Trump. One of the things I was disappointed was I didn't think Canada and Mexico really worked together. At least it didn't seem like they were really working together when we were both threatened with the tariffs. I mean, Mexico made a move first. Luckily, Canada stayed strong, but...
Yeah, and that's something like that is what I'm worried about in Europe. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I agree. A global front would be even better. I heard somebody like floated the idea of Canada becoming a member of the European Union. You know, that would be a formal way of going, you know, unifying even more. But even if it's like global campaigns, creating opinion against what's going on, that would be helpful as well.
What do you say, Leilani? Do you want to come in?
I would like to be a member of the European Union.
You're welcome.
Absolutely. And I could get away from this terrible winter.
That's climate change. That's something else, my friend, you know.
Oh, it wouldn't change my climate? No, but I could travel.
We have winters. We have winters here as well.
Not like here, my friend. Well, maybe in the north in Sweden. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I think it's interesting. We have this small strike ongoing for such a long time. There is already kind of example of resistance. And there is a big factory in Germany. And of course, if that starts to organize better, I mean, things can change. And I think, what do you think about, I mean, you know a lot about the unions in Europe. Can the unions create resistance together? Because they're also affected of all this happening, their members.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something I've been puzzled by, actually, because there are ways of, I mean, of course, you can have PR campaigns and so forth, boycotts, you know, that could be used more. But there are also formal ways, formal legal recourses. And they haven't been used that much yet. As I mentioned, unions in Norway, Denmark, and Finland have called solidarity strikes with the Swedish union. But they could do that in Germany as well, from what I understand. At least it's not entirely clear that they couldn't. So that could be tried. And there are other countries that also have solidarity mechanisms. They're not equally regulated everywhere. And I think maybe no other country in the world has so permissive labor law in terms of solidarity strikes as Sweden does. But there are many countries that do have that option. So I think there are still things to do, yeah.
In the history of the labor unions, there have always been a chant of international solidarity is the way to change the world. So is this a moment where unions globally could be a force, do you think? Who would take a lead in that if that would happen? I'm just speculating, but I think it's kind of interesting because the unions are, as you see, the Swedish metal workers union have $1 billion in a conflict safe, you know. Yeah. So I mean, they're not weak.
No, at least in Sweden they're not. In some countries they are. I mean, in the US and in Canada as well, I think they're not very strong. Individually, they're strong organizations, but in terms of the entire labor market, they are very small. And I think unions are. I mean, it's in many times of historic disruption of authoritarian rulings, then unions have almost always been one of the first targets. When dictators take power, one of the first things they do is round up union leaders and shoot them or deport them or jail them. And you could see it in this case as well. I mean, one of Elon Musk's primary targets are unions. He really, really doesn't like them. It's obvious that they have to be a key part of any resistance to this. So, I mean, if you don't just understand it from history or from learning about how unions work today, you can just look at who Elon Musk's and Donald Trump's targets are? Well, unions. So it's obvious that they are, forced to be reckoned with.
They pose a threat, yeah.
Leilani, you see a much even bigger resistance coalition. Can you tell me about your thoughts about that?
You mean with respect to what's happening in the U.S.?
Not only mass movements, also legal.
Yeah. I mean, there is a way in which we do have to start understanding that there's so many different ways to resist, and that even if we're taking different ways, using different skills from different sectors, we're all resisting together. So whether it's academics or people who are researchers at think tanks or journalists or grassroots movements, there is a way in which we need to start connecting the different ways that we're resisting a little bit more than we already do. I'm not saying we don't do that. I mean, I know...
Are you including filmmakers?
Oh, yeah, filmmakers. Documentary film. Actually, seriously, documentary films are playing a very important role right now, I feel. I mean, every day someone's saying to me, have you seen this doc? Have you seen this doc? Have you seen this doc? As a way of spreading information, knowledge, and especially important for us to somehow reach young people. In one podcast I was listening to about this issue, about the strike against Tesla in Sweden, there was a comment like, some young people don't even know what unions are in this world. They don't know what a collective bargaining looks like what that is and why that's so important. And that part of union driving has to be reaching young people. But that's so true and we need young people for our movements. We know that because they have the energy. That's for sure. They have the raw feelings necessary.
We need everybody. But of course, we also need young people.
Yeah, and I think just a small comment on that is that, about documentary filmmakers or activists or journalists, they are also targets. When people do films about these people, they risk getting sued. They risk getting...
I've been sued. I've been sued.
You've been sued. I mean, they risk getting their distributors shut down or threatened. I mean, these people know that intimidating works, and they have so much money that they can keep, numerous legal processes going on. Even if they know that they will fail, people will back down because, an independent filmmaker maybe doesn't have the money to hire lawyers, even if it's very likely that they will win in the end. It's very big risk. And maybe you know more about that.
I was actually interviewed in the US podcast about this pipeline in South Dakota and that struggle where the pipeline company has hired the same lawyers who came after us in the Bananas case. Gibson Dunn, would like the most aggressive law firm in the US. And they are now attacking both Greenpeace, but they're also attacking a media collective who's been reporting on this. And it's really serious, of course. It's very difficult to have those assholes on top of you. It's really ugly. So I understand that it's serious, and that's why also solidarity is important. It's also important to support people who are under pressure and to talk about it. And of course, when we then talk about films, you should use the films, show the films, tell your friends about the films. My last film, Breaking Social, you can now see it on the platforms in the Nordic countries of the broadcasters, in the Netherlands, in Switzerland, in Germany, France, Italy. Around Europe, you can see it's on TV or on the broadcasters' platforms, or you can watch it through us. And you can, if you're in the US and Canada, you can book the film through Good Docs and make your own showings. You can do that, Leilani, in your town, like Oxfam did a few weeks ago.
In my absence.
In your absence, yeah. So we can fight back, and we will, of course. Herman and Leilani, thank you very much for being on Pushback Talks. And I think we will be like the resistance podcast. That will be we will be needed. And we will keep finding people like you, Herman, and others too, who can tell us and give us inspiration about what's going on. It's not hopeless.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me. I didn't really see myself as part of a resistance, but I'm honored to be seen as one. So I'm glad to be a member.
Absolutely.
You're welcome.
How else do movements have the knowledge? We need researchers. We need analysis, think tanks.
Yeah.
So thanks for your work.
That's how it is. Leilani, so you're walking your dog in the snow, or what's the plan?
I already walked the dog.
Okay.
Oh, no, I'm going on vacation next week, so I need to get ready for that. It's laundry.
Okay, that sounds like a nice plan. So please shortly tell our listeners how we fund the show.
So we don't fund the show, but we hope our listeners will. Patreon.com. You can go to patreon.com and look for Pushback Talks, and you can just support us with a few euros, dollars, a week, a month, a year.
Yeah, it helps. I mean, that's also a way of being solidarian, is to support work like this, because it's true, like Leilani says, we don't make any money out of it. And of course, we have costs related to producing the show. So if you can, help us and keep resisting, and also keep smiling.
And tell your friends about Pushback Talks.
Exactly. Subscribe, comment, tell your friends. Thank you very much, Leilani.
Thanks, Fredrik.
Thank you, Sherman.
Thanks.
Pushback Talks is produced by WG Film. To support the podcast, become a patron by going to patreon.com/pushbacktalks. Follow us on social media at make_the_shift and push_the_film. Or check out our websites, maketheshift.org, pushthefilm.com, or breakingsocialfilm.com.